Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Soul and R&B icon Brian McKnight performs at Strathmore in North Bethesda, Maryland this Friday night. I spoke with the 16-time Grammy nominee about his biggest hits from Anytime to Back at One. Hey, Brian McKnight, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Now, I believe have you been trying to schedule the Strathmore show for a while? This pandemic keeps postponing it.
Yeah, I can't remember just how long it's been, but it's been quite a while. So it's great that we're getting this opportunity to for the fans and for everyone involved, to be able to do this now. Since I've been waiting, and I'm sure they've been waiting for quite some time.
Yeah, I think we interviewed you back like in 2020, back when the concert was first announced, and then people heard it on our radio station, and they've been waiting all this time to come see you. So it's great they can finally come see you. So if they do show up at the Strathmore in North Bethesda, what are they going to hear? Is it like a collection of greatest hits? Any new stuff? What we got?
Yeah, I'm not a fool. I know why people come to see me. I'm gonna play all the songs that they want to hear, and I'll sprinkle some new ones in, and there'll be some humor. There'll be some, I try to take folks through all of the emotions. Uh, we had a death in our family, and for a lot of reasons, I probably shouldn't even be doing shows, but therapeutically, it's good to be on stage. It's good to feel that love from folks, even when you're down, even when things aren't exactly the way that you want them to be. The music itself has always been something that I wrote for people to get through whatever they were going through, and now it's become even more therapeutic for myself and for my family as well.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about the death in your family. Our hearts go out to you, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
But yes, hopefully the live music and music in general, in all forms, is the biggest therapeutic we have. It's a healing power, man. So thank you so much for doing it for everybody.
No problem.
Whenever I have someone esteemed like yourself on, I love to hear your whole journey. So I know you're born in Buffalo back in '69. And you grew up in a bit of a musical family, right? Like, explain.
Yeah, so pretty much when you're born into our family, it's a foregone conclusion that you're going to be musical. My grandfather was the minister of music in our church, and our choir was mostly comprised of our family members. My grandparents had 7 children, and all of their children, I think there are 21 of us. Everybody sings, everybody plays. My brother, who sings in the gospel group Take Six, I think he has 10 Grammys. So, it's been sort of a family business.
Exactly. And do you remember what you all listened to growing up? Like, what was playing around the house?
My mom loved to listen to gospel music. My brothers and I have 3 older brothers. We all had various different musical tastes. We listened to everything. And the beautiful thing about growing up in the 70s and the 80s was it was before music became so terribly compartmentalized. So you'd hear Willie Nelson, then Earth, Wind and Fire, then Steely Dan, then, AC/DC or Kiss, all on the same radio station. So you got a real great grouping of lots of different types of music before it became so specialized.
That's great when the same DJ can switch from Earth, Wind, and Fire to Willie Nelson to AC/DC. I mean, you're getting the gamut there. Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, you mentioned your older brother, Claude. His group Take Six. They signed with Warner Alliance in 1987. So when for you, when was sort of your little foot in the door? Like I know you started recording demos at a studio in Huntsville, Alabama back in college, but explain sort of those early days and recording those demos. Like, how did that go down?
Well, I was going to school in Huntsville. The actual studio where Take Six got sort of discovered after they made their first sort of independent record was the studio that I was working out of as a professional writer. I got a publishing deal when I was 18 to write. And all those demos that we did then were sent out to all the record companies and the publishing companies. And they started asking, well, who's writing music? I was like, well, I am. It's like, well, who's producing? It's like, I am. Well, who's singing? It's like, well, I am. It's like, well, do you want a record deal? It's like, okay. I never really thought about being an artist. I wanted to be David Foster. I wanted to be the guy sort of behind the music. But everybody wants to be a rock star. I don't care who you are. That, you know, whether you sing in the shower, whether you can sing or can't sing, there's always that dream of being either an athlete or a rock star. And so I took that chance, not thinking that it would actually turn into a 30-year career, but it has.
That we're glad you took the chance. So you signed with Wing Records, which is a part of subsidiary of Mercury, and so you record that platinum selling debut album, self-titled Brian McKnight in 1992. Talk about that first hit single there, One Last Cry. How did you come, like, how did that song come about?
You know what's interesting is that, but that was actually my third single. So The Way Love Goes was first, and then Goodbye My Love, which were, you know, taken right to what was then R&B type radio. But they were all a setup for One Last Cry. One Last Cry was written, actually, I wrote it when I was 19, thinking that I could pitch that to Bette Midler. I didn't want to sing that song. I didn't think that it was cool for, you know, a guy that thought he was cool to sing this sort of soft, broken-hearted song. I wrote it thinking that a woman would sing it. Not that they're, you know, not being sexist or anything, but back then that's the kind of songs that women sang. Ed Eckstein, who signed me, he was brilliant. He was like, he showing that a man can be sensitive, which wasn't new necessarily, but um, I was a 21-year-old kid, and here's this One Last Cry, and we set it up with a duet that I did with Vanessa Williams called "Love Is" for the Beverly Hills 90210 soundtrack, and then it was my introduction to pop radio. That's the one thing I've never really talked about much: how to walk that fine line between crossing over into, you know, popular music while also keeping your foot, you know, entrenched in your base, which is, you know, whatever you want to call it, black music, R&B music. That's been the tightrope I've walked since the very beginning of my career.
Well, you said that's something you haven't talked about much. Let's talk about it. What is the key to that? How do you do it without, how do you make sure you don't go too far in one direction and keep the hardcore fans of your specific genre?
It's almost impossible. If you look at myself and a group like Boys to Men and a few others who had had that kind of, you know, popular success on the other charts, you know, there's sometimes, at least for us as an artist, I don't think resentment's the right word, but you know, when you start at one place and then you go to this other place where now you become, you know, more of a household name, you know, then people can think that you Scott sort of forgot where you came from, and it's not even that. I think it's just as musicians, as songwriters, as artists, we want our music to be listened to by the greatest number of people that we possibly can. And that's what our motivation is. It was never about, oh, I only want to play to those people or to these people. I want to play to everybody. But as a Black artist, there's a way you have to do that, and I'm not sure that any of us have done it as best as we possibly can, but you know, because there's a lot of trial and error that goes along with that, you know. It's
For
tough.
sure. Well, you've managed to do it, and boys, you mentioned Boys to Men. There's a select few there from that era that were able to do it. And speaking of Boys to Men, really quick, I got to give a shout out because people probably don't ask you much. They ask about your hits, but tell me about producing that holiday album. We just got through Christmas here. Christmas Interpretations in '93 was one of my favorites. Growing up, you talk about crafting that with those guys because you had covers of classic Christmas carols like Silent Night, which is perfect for their harmonies. But then you had like new original kind of stuff like the Let It Snow reimagining, the whole new version there. So talk about producing that record.
You know, I met those guys in a hotel lobby in New York when I was mixing my first album. They didn't know who I was. They knew who my brother was, but I was just playing the piano in the lobby, and they were coming back from a promotion that they were doing, and we all met. And fast forward to 2 years later, when they were going to do their Christmas album after the huge success of that first album of theirs, you know, they called me. They're kids. I'm a kid. I've only ever produced, a couple of other things, and you know, it was really great because they had these ideas of these songs that they didn't play. So they were just singing me what was in their head, and I had to craft this whole record based on what I thought I was hearing from what they were singing to me. And then I went back, and they're still on tour. I fly all over the world with them, and while they're taking a break from their tour, they're coming in the studio with me. I wrote "Let It Snow" walking down the street in London in July It's blazing
Christmas
hot.
in July.
You know, but yeah, so it was a really fun experience, and those guys are definitely my extended family. They are my brothers and have been now, yeah, almost 30 years.
That is so so cool. And then you kept working with them on other projects too. So that's just great stuff. All right. Well, enough dishing about your collabs with other people. I want to at least hit a couple of your big solo ones too. So anytime was massive in '97. Both the song and the album of the same name. The album went I think a couple times platinum. But take me into the writing of that song. How did you come up with Anytime, sir?
I after my second album, the first record I think went double platinum, and then my second album was I think right at a million. So I was trying to figure out what I did or whether there was some sort of disconnect. So the beginning of that song was really a letter to the fans, kind of saying, I'm trying to figure out. Some of my greatest writers were able to pull off double entendres with, there's this meaning, but then there's that meaning. As I delved into the song, I was like, I think that very few people are going to be able to relate to this. So I spun it into more of a relationship type song. But I was really kind of, lamenting the fact that I think that what we all want is for every record to do a bit better than the last one. But sometimes you have that sort of sophomore sort of jinx or whatever it is when the first one is done so well that you can't really put your finger on why the next one isn't. But then Anytime comes and becomes the juggernaut that it is. And then I sort of figured out what people wanted from me. So when Back at One comes along, then it's like, okay, now I know. And we saw what that one did.
Yeah, you mentioned Back at One. I doubt if you have a second, please relay the story you told me last time about coming up with that one. You just moved into a new house and we're going through an
Well,
instruction
yeah.
manual. Please remind our listeners, it's a hilarious story.
Yeah. So, after the success of Anytime built that house that I was moving into. And I've always been an electronics geek, whether it was video games, components. This is like the beginning of the really serious home theater. And the guys were there that were putting in the home theater. And I'm looking at the manual for the DVD player. And on pretty much on every troubleshooting page of a component, it says, well, do step one, do step two. If the problem persists, do this, then repeat steps 1, 2, and 3. And I was like, whoa, that's a song. And then the rest is kind of history. That's probably the song I've written the fastest. The hardest part of that song was sort of the jazzy intro that I play. Everything else was like 5 minutes later, the song was finished.
Oh, absolutely. And it's also the song that's probably reached the widest, most diverse audience because shortly after that, country artist Mark Wills did a cover. Take me into your thoughts on when you heard he was going to be doing that, and just how you thought it stacked up.
So what I thought is that, and this is a typical businessman, I'm like, well, I've got every other chart except for country. If Mark does this and it even becomes a pseudo hit, then I've actually hit almost every chart except for rock or new age, whatever that is, and the jazz charts. But got to meet Mark, got to actually perform the song with Mark, and we became really good friends. So that's why that song, I think that year from 99 to 2000 was the most played song everywhere because nobody else had that many, you know, uh, playlists that were going on at the time. So it was really great.
That's got to be wild. You're right. It's been so many people have heard it on all the different charts. It's got to be wild to know that you could walk up to pretty much anyone of any stripe down the street, and if you say the number one, most anyone could go like a dream come true. It's got to be. I mean, you hit everybody. It's fantastic. Um,
Yeah, and as a songwriter, that's what you want for sure.
You're ubiquitous, man. Well, really cool. I appreciate you joining us. Before we run, I do want to ask again about the Kobe Bryant duet you did, "Hold Me." Man, I
Right.
mean, uh, at the time it must have meant one thing to you. Wow, I'm collaborating with the next Michael Jordan or whatever. But now in hindsight, after Kobe's tragic passing, it must mean a whole another thing to you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have the distinction of being one of the only artists in the world that's created music with Kobe Bryant. But beyond that, it was the friendship. It was sort of the two of us stepping in. If you look at that video, you know, I'm playing basketball in the video with a bunch of first round draft picks. Derek Fisher and Paul Pierce and
Mm.
Chris Mills are all in that video playing basketball with me, while Kobe's actually playing the recording artist. So it was a fun day. It was really incredible to sort of meet him, because this was really before anybody knew that he was going to become what he became. I think it was his second year in the league, and his first year didn't go that great. So to have a part in that, to sort of, you know, he was asking me questions about the music business and all that, and being able to be there for him was really great. So when he passed, it was like, again, one of my brothers, you know, leaving this earth. So, and it's still, it's been 2 years now almost, and it's still surreal, and and doesn't appear and doesn't feel to be real.
Oh yeah, that's gonna forever be, you know, for the rest of all of our lives. That's gonna be one of those remember where you were moments for sure. It's so sad, but on the, you know, on the, you know, silver lining, you guys will always be frozen forever in time in that video. So you'll all, you know, it'll
That's right.
always be there. Again, it's gonna be at the Strathmore in North Bethesda this Friday. 16-time Grammy nominee Brian McKnight. Hey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
We also spoke in 2020 before the pandemic postponed his previous show at Strathmore. Brian McKnight, it's an honor to talk to you. Thanks so much for calling in.
No problem.
What can we expect from the show? I know you got a new single out, Never Get Enough of You. Are we going to hear a little of that, and maybe, you know, maybe some of your hits too?
Yeah, so basically my show is a retrospective of the 30 years I've been in the business. So I go back and I play. I'm not foolish. I know why people are coming to see me. So I play all the songs that they're coming to hear. It's definitely a 90s retrospective, and I sprinkle in a few new things, but for the most part, it's all the hits from yesteryear.
Awesome. Well, that sounds great. And then, you know, when we're sitting in the audience looking up on stage, what do we get? What are we working with? You got a certain amount of people. You know, you got backup singers. You got a band with you. What do you got on stage?
Well, I have my band and myself. I don't really do background singers necessarily. We try our best to put together the best hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes of music and entertainment that we can possibly do. I've been told now, I'm not going to confirm this myself, but I'm very, very funny. So there's humor, there's music, there's all the ranges of emotions. And we just, you know, we basically give the folks what they, I mean, people have seen me. Most of the people that come to see me have seen me at some point in the last 30 years. So I just really want to give them what they expect, which is I'm going to sing to the best of my ability. I'm going to play to the best of my ability and play all the songs that they're coming to hear.
Awesome. Take me back to the beginning. I know you were, you know, born up in Buffalo. How'd you get bit by the music bug to begin with?
Well, I come from a musical family. We all grew up singing in church. All my aunts, uncles, cousins, my brothers, and myself. Never thinking about doing it professionally, but my brother sings in the group 6-6 when he got signed and they started doing their thing. That's when it became a possibility. So then I dropped everything and started pursuing music as a writer and as a producer and as an artist full time when I was 18.
Awesome. And before we get to that point, I also want to know, you know, what sort of records you guys, you know, routinely were playing around the household growing up? Was it mostly just the singing in the church, or what sort of like popular music was playing around your house as a kid?
Well, you got to realize this was the end of the 70s and all through the 80s, so it was one of the greatest periods of time to grow up because you had all the music from the 60s that our parents were listening to. And then you had all the Stevie Wonder and the Earth, Wind & Fire and the Bee Gees in the 70s and the 80s music from Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie and Kenny Loggins and the Police. I mean, I play guitar, so I wanted to be in Van Halen at some point, but obviously that did not happen. But, you know, I really got a great musical education, and my grandfather led, you know, big band in the 40s, so I'm also a huge jazz head. So I think I have a really great musical library of music to draw from for the music that I create.
For sure. And how did you develop that? You know, man, you got one of the best, you know, falsettos in the biz. You got some range. Did you have any formal singing lessons back in the day, or is that just like an innate gift, man?
Yeah, I think everyone in our family sat at the feet of our parents who all sang. So I wouldn't say that we were formally trained, but our parents were. So they gave us some of the same kind of training that they had growing up, even though we didn't actually go to actual teachers.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. All right. Well, so as you mentioned, your older brother, was in Take Six, which I'm sure a lot of folks will remember. They signed their deal with Warner Brothers, and then how did that ultimately lead to you signing with Wing Records? I think you were like 19 or something. But how did that?
Right.
Was there any connection there? Was that any contact you knew through your brother, or how'd that?
No, it didn't really work that way. I am a songwriter. I mean, I'm an artist too, but I'm a songwriter first. And I sent all my demos out to all the record companies and all the publishing companies out there. And they basically were like, well, who's writing the songs? Like, that's me. Well, who's singing the songs? Like, that's me. Who's producing the songs? Like, that's me. Like, do you want a record deal? I was like, okay. And that's how it began.
But yeah, I mean, there's not any, that are the triple threat like that. So I'm sure when they saw the songwriter and that voice, they're like, that's the same guy. Oh, we signed him up.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It wasn't quite that easy, but I paraphrased it for you. Yeah, it was about a year of actually searching, and it finally happened.
When you are cutting those demos, where are you cutting the demos?
I actually signed as a professional writer when I was 18. I was working in a studio every day down in Huntsville, Alabama, where I was going to college, and I was very lucky in that respect that I got to be able to do that and actually work in a studio. We're talking 1988. Nobody had a home studio in 1988. You had to go to a studio. Technology wasn't like it is now, where anybody could have a studio in their home. So, yeah, I was very fortunate to actually work in a studio every day.
That's awesome. Then you get you have your self-titled debut album in '92, and I remember the big song, One Last Cry off of that. How did that one actually come to you? Do you remember where you were when you actually put pen on that one?
No, not really. My first album was a collection of songs that I was really just trying to imitate all the songs that I listened to when I was a kid. I hadn't really been through anything. I know that people use that song as their get over a breakup song, but I've never had a breakup, so I have no idea what that must feel like. I was just really trying to call on all the sad songs I'd ever heard of and try. Actually, I wrote that song hoping that a woman would sing it, but when the record label heard that song, they were like, we're not giving that away. You're keeping it. I'm glad they made that decision because it's one of my biggest hits.
People still sing that today, like all singing competition shows, or or just people it's still around. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And then I know you did a duet, Love Is. I remember that. I feel like, dude, I grew up on your music, so I'm like, there's so many I want to talk about.
It was great. I'd actually produced part of her second album, the Comfort Zone album. So when that song Love Is actually from the Beverly Hills 90210 soundtrack, when that show was really hot, and it was a duet that it was just natural for us to do. And we did it, not thinking anything would come of it, but it was actually my very first charted, top 100 Billboard song, and that didn't pave the way for One Last Cry. It was really a great introduction to the pop chart. But then One Last Cry was able to do what it did based on what we were able to introduce with that song.
Absolutely. And then this is a bit of a deeper cut, but we're talking collaborations, and I loved your Boys to Men thing, the Let It Snow. I mean, that song had been around forever in one form, and you guys totally flipped it and added whole new lyrics to it. And, my brother and I jamming out to that growing up around Christmas. But what was it like working with, I guess you wrote that with Wanya, right?
I did. We were in London because they were on tour, and I produced that whole Christmas album for them. And it was June, so I'm writing Christmas songs in June in the summertime. And those guys are like my brothers. We've known each other a very, very, very long time. So it was really great to work with them and continue to be as close as we are 25 years later.
Awesome. Tell me about Crazy Love, because I know your album I Remember You was pretty big as well. Take me into the creation of Crazy Love.
Yeah, it was another movie soundtrack. There was a hit movie out that year called Jason's Lyric that I worked on. I produced actually 2 songs on that album. And the producers of the movie came. It's a Van Morrison song, one of the very few covers I've done in my career. And I produced that song for the movie, and at that time, Van Morrison had to clear everyone that recorded his music, and he gave me a thumbs up, and the rest is history.
Awesome. And of course, you just keep bigger and bigger, and I mean, Anytime is probably one of the biggest songs of the 90s, at least that I remember. Like, that just loops in my ear when I think back to that time. But how did you actually come up with the idea to write
Some songs, they just kind of write themselves. I can't really remember a concept or what I was thinking. I mean, again, it's another ultimate sort of breakup song, which I haven't been through. But, sometimes the changes that you play and the melodies you come up with actually dictate how the song is going to go. And Anytime is the perfect example of music and lyric coming together in a way that was very synchronistic.
Yeah. Would you say the same thing for, Back at One? That was another huge one. How do you get the idea to count it off? I mean, like a numerical count off.
Right. So Anytime built the house we lived in California, and I was putting in a home theater, and I was reading the manual for the DVD player. And I went to the troubleshooting page because it wasn't working, and it said, do step 1, step 2, and step 3, and if the problem persists, then do this and repeat steps 1, 2, and 3. And the song was born from that.
Wow, that's wild. I had no clue.
Yeah.
Hey, wasn't there like a country cover of that one too?
Yeah, so that's what made me Songwriter of the Year that year, because not only was it a hit for myself on 5 or 6 different charts, and it was also number 1 on 2 country charts. My good friend Mark Wills covered it at the exact same time, kind of like when Leanne Rimes and I can't remember the young lady's name who did the How Do I Live Without You?
Trisha Yearwood.
1 and 2.
Trisha Yearwood.
Yeah, at the very same time, number 1 and number 2 on the chart at the same time. So that was really, really cool.
Well, I mean, you mentioned it, that Billboard gave, Songwriter of the Year, but it's true that it really is of a good song, whether, like I Will Always Love You could be Dolly Parton, or Whitney Houston could blow it out of the water too. Like, that is the mark of a good songwriter, so off to you. I know around that time you switched to Motown Records too, right? I think in like 98. How exciting was that you probably listened to a bunch of those records growing up, and to finally be on that label yourself?
Yeah, it was great for the history that was associated with that. It was really more of a move. Polygram had then sold everything to Universal, and they moved the entire sort of black music department at Polygram over to Motown. So it was great to be associated with so many great acts at that time. To be on, to say that you're on Motown was really special. It was one of those things that I'm with Berry Gordy. It was really great to be on that label.
Gotcha. And is it true? Not is it true?
Jason,
I remember, but yeah.
Jason, sorry to interrupt. We have time for one last question.
Okay, cool. Real quick, ask you about you work with the late Kobe Bryant on Hold Me. Memories of
right.
that, and your reaction to, now that he's lost, man.
Yeah, one of the greatest people that I've ever met, and to have been in his life when he was so young and just coming into his own, and to see him grow. It was really tragic for myself and my family, what's happened, and being able to reflect on not only what he meant to us personally, but what the whole world, what he meant to the whole world. And, it's still something that it's unbelievable to wait. I still wake up every morning not believing that this has happened. But the world was a better place because Kobe Bryant was here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we appreciate you taking the time. Man, I don't know what we got to do to get you a Grammy. You got like 16 nominations. It's gonna. you deserve one, man. We'll keep pushing it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.